Tonight on Greater Boston, I'm joined by the journalist behind a new Hulu documentary exploring the links between a triple murder in Waltham in 2011 and the Boston Marathon bombings not even 2 years later. Could solving the first murders have prevented the second? Then multi-talented Dropkick Murphys frontman Ken Casey joins me on the eve of the band's latest album release, a collaboration of sorts with Woody Guthrie, and just weeks ahead of his latest restaurant opening with a little taste of what's to come. On September 11, 2011, 3 people were found murdered in a Waltham apartment. The victims all had their throats slashed, and to this day, the case remains unsolved. Police indicated at the time that it appeared to be a drug deal gone very bad, citing the fact that all 3 victims sold marijuana. But others think there's a lot more to the story, as is explored in a new Hulu documentary.
When the Waltham murders happened on September 11th, 2011, clearly the police didn't seem to give much thought to the idea that the date would be significant, that this was a ritualistic act.
It would appear that the resources necessary to bring this investigation to a very quick and successful conclusion were not devoted to that investigation.
The series is Murders Before the Marathon because the journalist at the center believes that if the Waltham case had been solved, it would have prevented the Boston Marathon bombings 1.5 years later. That journalist is Susan Zalkind, who, in full disclosure, used to be my intern when I hosted a TV show on NECN, and has since gone on to report for This American Life, Boston Magazine, The Guardian, The Daily Beast, Vice, and more. Susan, it's great to see you, and congratulations. It's really amazing.
Did I make you proud yet?
We'll see how this interview goes. We'll take it from there. How and why did you get involved in this thing?
Well, it was the most unusual murder case in New England I'd ever heard in decades and decades. I started looking into it, and then I found out one of the victims was my friend.
How long a period of time was it from the point that you first read about it online, I think at NECN as a matter of fact, until you found out that one of the 3 victims had been somebody you'd been pretty close to? It
was a few days. I saw posts on Facebook that I didn't want to believe them at first about R.I.P. Hetty E. And then I got the email from the Middlesex DA and I saw the name Eric Wiseman and I was praying it was a different Eric Wiseman.
But it wasn't. 1.5 years later, a Boston Marathon. How aggressively would you say law enforcement pursued the people responsible for those murders in that 1.5 years?
I mean, that's one of the focus of the story is that it appears not to have been aggressively investigated at all. This was one of the most unusual homicides I'd heard of in the New England area in decades. You'd think that they would put all of their resources into finding out what happened, and apparently that wasn't the case.
Well, as part of the lack of being aggressive here, Tamerlan Tsarnaev, who everybody knows is one of the 2 people responsible for the murders at the marathon in April of 2013, was a close friend of one of the people who was murdered in Waltham. From what I understand from you and others, a number of people said Tamerlan Tsarnaev is somebody who should be spoken to. Was he?
Apparently he was not. There are a number of reasons why Tamerlan Tsarnaev should have been questioned.
What are they?
Well, for one, he's close friends with the victims. For another thing, you think about the physicality of this crime. How do you take 3 men down? Brendan Mess had a purple belt in jiu-jitsu. He went to the Y Crew.
One of the victims.
One of the victims. He went to the Y Crew gym 3 or 4 times a week. And do you know who he trained with? Tamerlan Tsarnaev. So even without people close to this case handing Tamerlan Tsarnaev's name to investigators on a silver platter, don't you think investigators should have gone to the gym?
Well, in addition to going to the gym, correct me if I'm wrong, he was very close with Brendan Mess. And one of the other odd things, according to some friends, and I think objective people, he didn't go to the funeral. That didn't pique any interest in the law enforcement either.
He was best friends and sparring partners with Brendan Mess.
Okay, so fast forward to April 15th, 2013. We all know about the horror of the murders. A month later, I think I got the time right, a guy we had never heard of, Ibrahim Todashev, is in an apartment, a condo or something in Orlando. He's being questioned, Orlando, Florida, being questioned by an FBI agent. State police from Massachusetts were present there as well. He's murdered, shot, I should say, and killed, to be fair, by the FBI agent. What did Todashev tell them before he was shot and killed?
I mean, this has been the focus of my investigation for years, to figure out exactly what Ibrahim Tadashev said. Allegedly, according to documents, he implicated himself and Tamerlan Tsarnaev in the Waltham triple homicide.
And he was apparently in the midst of doing some sort of confession?
When he was shot 7 times, including once in the top of the head.
And what kind of explanation have we got? How many cops or how many law enforcement people were in the room?
There were 3.
3 people in the room and him. Were the police officers armed?
They were. I mean, one of the focuses of this docuseries and my work is that the Middlesex was in charge of this investigation. There was
Middlesex County here.
There was an ADA officer who told the men, after Ibrahim Tadashev confessed, not to put him in cuffs. There was no arrest plan for confronting a trained fighter in his own home about a gruesome triple homicide connected to the Boston Marathon bombing.
How many times was he shot?
7.
7 times in his apartment.
In his own home. And this is a man with a track record of violence. For me, there's a 4.5 interview. Knowing what I know now about Ibrahim Tadashev, it's surprising to me that he wouldn't have attacked those men sooner rather than later.
What did you tell us a little bit? What do you know now about Tadashev that obviously none of us knew because none of us ever heard of him before this? What do you know?
Well, he was an aspiring MMA fighter. He had also trained at the Y Crew gym with Tamerlan Tsarnaev, and he had a hair-trigger temper. Someone would insult his mother. He'd be ready to fight 17 people. There was a paper trail of, again, car incidents where he would throw fisticuffs. 2 weeks before he was shot, he beat a man bloody in the parking lot, sent him home on a stretcher over a parking space. The investigators knew that about Ibrahim Tadashev when they went to the room to question him that evening.
And you did a hell of a lot of research and investigation into whether or not Tadashev was even here at the time of the triple murders. And despite some people close to him suggesting he was not, what'd you conclude on that front?
Well, because the nature of this interview was so suspicious, you have a man killed in the middle of the confession, I needed to find information separately from the shooting reports confirming whether or not Ibrahim Tadashev was in Boston at the time of the murders. Initially, people close to him said that he was not. There was an alibi. Eventually, the story changed, and I found out he was in Boston at the time of the murders, and he left 2 days later with a stack of cash.
So let's do time frames again for a minute. A little more than a year and a half from the triple murders in Waltham, the marathon bombing and all the mayhem that came with it, April of 2013. I think it's May of 2013 this incident happens with Tadashev. Does this investigation pick up any steam after this guy says that one of the 2 marathon bombers was my partner in a triple murder in Waltham?
No, no, and no. And I would love for the Middlesex County District Attorney's Office to prove me wrong on this point, to at least account for how much they did and did not investigate this case before the marathon bombing and after the fact.
And we're going to talk in a minute about that. They've not been terribly forthcoming because they say it's an open investigation. Is that their line?
Exactly.
Okay. And this vacuum, I guess you can call it a vacuum, that was left by the fact that law enforcement didn't fill it was...
Can I just say one thing?
Sure.
You think of Daniel Mastey, who's in the interview, in the docuseries, saying, I told them about Tamerlan Tsarnaev back then. He had talked to law enforcement. He still hasn't been questioned. Law enforcement did not go back to him after the bombing and say, hey, you told us this tip then, why don't we talk about it now? That still hasn't happened. So when I say that this is not being thoroughly investigated, I know that because I'm talking to people with crucial information about this case who have not been contacted by law enforcement.
And by the way, they're in the documentary. You can hear them in their own words. It's not just channeling through you. I started to say was a vacuum was created by virtue of the law enforcement not filling it, and some people who we see in the news quite frequently, not in the most pleasant of ways, filled it. Like who, for example? Alex Jones?
Well, exactly. I mean, that was part of what motivated me to find answers, was because there was no information from law enforcement, anyone in power. Instead, there was this vacuum where you have RT News and Alex Jones spreading misinformation.
Russia Today.
Yeah. And a lot of those conspiracy theories live on today.
You know, I know you don't like this question very much. We discussed this when you were on the radio with me and Marjorie Egan a couple of weeks ago. There are 2 why questions. Why in your estimation, and I know it's purely conjecture on your part, was law enforcement so uninterested in solving this case, and their behavior suggests that, prior to what happened in Orlando, Florida, but much more confusing to me, why well, not confusing to me, I should say, the lack of interest afterwards is obviously they would have been humiliated had the dots been connected and it had been clear, had they pursued Tamerlan Tsarnaev, there would have been a different outcome. But why in those intervening, whatever it was, 18 months, 16 months, why after the Waltham murders was there such little interest in your estimation?
I think those are very important questions, the why question, but what we haven't accounted for is the fact that it was not thoroughly investigated. And when you come up with the why question is great, but if you don't have solid information, and I will have more information in my book, you can almost distract people. You had this with the propaganda that was spread by Russia Today, and you had politicians asking the FBI, was Tamerlan Tsarnaev an informant? They were wondering why he wasn't questioned after there was a tip from Russia about his radicalization.
In Dagestan.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Why wasn't he questioned? And the focus on all of that questioning was he an FBI informant, rather than why was this national security issue not thoroughly addressed? Well, the fact that it happened what I'm saying is, rather than why, we haven't addressed the fact that there are these lapses.
And by the way, speaking of lapses, also lapses in information, disclosure to you, but what you told us recently is there's actually some good news. The dam appears to be breaking to a degree.
To a degree, after three
How so?
After 3 appeals and a public information request asking Middlesex to turn over their records, the Secretary of State has sided with me and asked Middlesex to turn over all of their records to the Secretary of State.
Are they doing that?
It looks like there's conversations, and to Marion Ryan's credit, it looks like they're taking action to comply with that order.
And do we ever see what is delivered to Bill Galvin, or what?
Well, that's what will happen next. The Middlesex says that none of it's admissible. The Secretary of State will now look at that information and see what is then admissible to me.
So in the 10 years of work, and it has been 10 years of almost constant work, your involvement in this thing, are you convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that Tamerlan Tsarnaev was involved in the triple murders in Waltham?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And is it anything but fair for me to say that if you're right and that crime had been solved, that Lingji Liu, Martin Richard, Crystal Campbell, Sean Collier, and a lot of broken bodies would have been spared? That connection, I mean, that is 100% the case if you were right.
It's terrible, but it's true. I don't see any other reasonable explanation for what happened.
Your work is terrific. The documentary is too. Susan Zalkind.
How'd I do?
You did excellently well. A proud former intern. Susan Zalkind. All 3 episodes of Murders Before the Marathon are available to stream on Hulu right now, and Susan's book on the case, The Waltham Murders, will be coming next year. You'll likely recognize my next guest as the voice of a classic. Now the Dropkick Murphys are releasing their 11th studio album, This Machine Still Kills Fascists. That's out tomorrow. The name comes from a phrase singer-songwriter activist Woody Guthrie once had painted on his guitar, and the album is a collaboration with legendary singer-songwriter who the band's frontman Ken Casey calls the original punk.
She's upside down, she's broke apart, and getting worse every day. A working man's hand is the hardest card in the whole damn deck to play.
But offstage, Casey has a lot going on as well. A staple in the Boston food and bar scene for well over a decade, including the sadly now closed McGreevy's Pub, going on to partner on Lower Mills Tavern in Dorchester, and Yellowdoor Taqueria, also in Dorchester in the South End, and the soon-open Mission Hill location later this month. Ken Casey joins me now. Ken, it's great to see you.
Good to be here, buddy.
How you been?
To see you again. Great, thank you.
So, what's with you and Mexican food?
Who doesn't love tacos?
Okay.
You know, in my travels, I've expanded my palate, and because I would think, especially growing up, Boston wasn't necessarily known as a place to get a great taco. But I've been lucky enough to spend a lot of time traveling around, and I thought it would be fun to bring the concept on home.
Well, you know, I'm going to taste some of this in a minute. You pretended a minute ago that you had something to do with cooking this, which is total BS, I
have
should
the
say.
video
Raise
on
your
my
right
phone
hand
to prove it.
and tell me I had something to do with cooking this.
God. We have a little fryer later in the green room. I dropped that fish in myself, and yeah, made it myself.
Should I try the fish?
The fish is my favorite on the menu.
Is it?
So yes.
What kind of fishes? Do you have any
it's
idea?
Local haddock. Yep.
And you helped cook this. Ken Casey helped cook this, so he says. Caught it this morning. Oh my God. Oh, that is fabulous. Actually, that really is fabulous.
Mango puree, pineapple. You know.
By the way, people watching a television show love hearing people chew while they're listening to it.
I know.
Because how do you know, a lot of people who do what you do for a primary living are in the food business. What drew you to this?
Well, the McGreevy's concept is what accidentally drew me into it, which sadly closed at the pandemic. But, you know, when we Dropkicks did the song Tessie, and some of the history behind that song came out when the Red Sox won the World Series, and the original baseball bar was McGreevy's, and a lot of the, you know, ardent fans called the Royal Rooters hung around there, and we opened a replica of that. And really, I was more into it from the baseball side. Lucky enough to have grown up with a good friend, Brian O'Donnell, who's a great restaurateur.
Part of the deal, right?
Yep. So it was like I had the idea, he had the knowledge, put them together, and we've had a bunch of other places together. And
is he going to be surprised when he hears you say a minute ago you cooked this stuff?
he will be shocked.
He will be shocked.
Yes. He'll be actually horrified. Might be a better.
This is ceviche, right?
Ceviche. Yep.
You had nothing to do with that.
Make
okay,
that,
fine.
yes.
Ceviche
So
is one of my favorite
safe,
foods in the whole world. Okay,
Yeah.
explain what ceviche is for people who haven't had it, please.
So it's you got some tuna in there, and it cooks in its own, cooks itself right in there, and the oils and stuff, and you have watermelon in there. Amazing, goes great on the chips and salsa, and chips and guac are my absolute favorite on the menu.
I had the guacamole last night. I had delivery from your joint.
Yeah.
Is unbelievable.
You know when you go into an Italian place and you just fill up on bread and on the food, that's what I do with the chips and guac. I'm full by the time the tacos come. So.
Pick the avocados, by the way. He told me last week somewhere.
I absolutely
on tour.
did.
Well, we'll keep eating in a second. So the CD is coming out tomorrow. As I said, the title, This Machine Still Kills Fascists. Explain this incredible connection between the Guthrie family and you guys.
Sure. So 20 years ago, Nora Guthrie, who's Woody's daughter, she's in charge of the archives of all Woody's hundreds and hundreds of pages of lyrics that he never put to music. Maybe he had in his mind, but he never recorded it, never wrote down the music. And at the time, 20 years ago, Nora's son, Cole, who was a teenager at the time, was a Dropkick Murphys fan. He said to his mom, I think Grandpa would have got a kick out of these guys. They have a lot, you know, in common for things that we sing about and whatnot. And we got invited down to go through the archives 20 years ago. At the time, you know, holding the actual pieces of paper he wrote these songs
That's
on.
exactly what I was going to ask. What does that feel like to know that his hand touched this thing that you're touching right there?
I kept getting yelled at. It was a special temperature-controlled room. I had to wear these special white gloves. And it literally just sat on my hands. And the woman in charge, not Nora, but the woman in charge of the room would say, so you have to be more gentle. And I said, it's just sitting in my hands. But Woody would always date when the song was written. When you think about it, you know, a lot of these songs were written mid-30s through mid-50s. I mean, how much happened in the world in that period? So to have that date really shed so much light on, you know, what was happening when he wrote it, and yeah, it's just amazing.
So you guys pulled, just so I understand, the unreleased lyrics, and you put music to it. Having no idea, really, obviously, what he would have done with the music.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it goes without, you guys are huge. But then there's Woody Guthrie.
Yeah.
How I know it's not the first time you've used some of his lyrics. How intimidating is that to do that?
It would be extremely intimidating if it wasn't for the fact that Nora has been so kind to us and said, like, you know, you have my trust. I know that, you know, how highly you think of my father. I know how much you respect his work, and it's in your hands, and I trust you. And after being told that and believing it, you know, he felt like, okay. And we would always run every idea by her, but she never once would say, I don't like that or change that. She just said, you have my trust, and I think, you know, my father would be proud of it. You know,
how's that feel?
Knows? Yeah, it feels good, man. This album is all acoustic because we wanted to give it some nod to how Woody would have done it. You know, obviously it's a little different, but. And we got to go to the town that Woody was born in, Okemah. Yeah, we recorded the album in Tulsa, but we went to Okemah, and we're walking down the street shooting videos, playing the guitars, and people would just pull up. "You here for Guthrie?" You know, and they took us in some back room of a place that had all kinds of other Guthrie archive stuff, and just, you know, it's just so much history, and yeah, it's awesome.
What did Nora think of the CD?
Yeah, she loves it, and we have a part 2 already done that'll come out next year, and you know, we did a movie on it, so we really got to do, like, it was really nice going beyond just the music and being able to document the whole process. We've never done that during a recording and whatnot.
So I hate to break the mood, but what's this thing?
That's chicken tinga. You have
Chicken who?
Chicken tinga. Yeah. We usually fry the avocados as well.
This is going to go all over
but
the place.
we were definitely afraid that the fire alarm was going to go off back there, so we tried to keep down our fryer later as much as possible.
You know, this is your last opportunity to tell the truth when you say you cooked this. Do you want to say that one more time, or do you want to recant what you said?
Well, full disclosure,
Yeah.
I just cooked the fish.
You just cooked the fish.
I didn't have a hand in the chicken.
That's not what you said at the beginning of this thing. I want to be clear on that. Okay, fine.
I did fry the churros.
We're getting to that when we get to dessert time. You know, before you go, we talk a lot on this show, as a lot of people do in America, about white nationalism, violence from some of the MAGA crowd. The difference is we talk about it and you confront it. And I'm going to talk to you about that for a minute. Here's you and your mates, I think in Pennsylvania earlier this month. Here it is.
If you're out there buying those f***ing hats that these swindlers are selling at that f***ing fair, I'm sorry, kids, I know there's kids here, then you're part of the problem, and I'll tell you why. Because you're being duped by the greatest swindler in the history of the world. You're being duped by a bunch of grifters and billionaires who don't give a shit about you or your family.
I think most people know there's that famous thing with a Nazi on the stage. I think it was 2013 in New York City. Obviously, you tried to enjoin these neo-Nazis here who are using one of your songs. Why do you, well, why is a stupid question. I know why. Why do you do this publicly? Why do you engage? Why do you decide to do this?
First of all, I was stressed when you said you were going to play that. I'm glad you beeped everything out because my mother gave me a little bit of crap about
I know your mother.
about my
She's
language.
a pretty good one.
You know, listen, the way I look at things nowadays, it's like to not speak up is to be complicit, because we could lose our democracy if we just assume that good's going to win out over evil. And I do think it's evil. I mean, just from the political side, forget the white national side. It's, you know, but when the former president, you know, is a sympathizer, it allows that dark underbelly to come out from under the rock and feel comfortable to show up at the St. Patrick's Day parade, you know, which never would have happened before. So, you know, when the top acknowledges it, you know, stand back and stand by, then they come out in force, you know.
You know, I'm sure you've heard the infamous quote from the best basketball player that ever lived, Michael Jordan. He was asked once why
Second best
he was not. Don't tell me LeBron.
Larry, of course.
Larry,
The
oh,
Boston
excuse me.
guy,
Sorry, I know. So he was asked why he wasn't endorsing a progressive candidate for the United States Senate years ago when that guy was running against an incumbent segregationist senator, and he said Republicans buy sneakers too. That doesn't worry you? I mean, they're fans. They buy CDs.
No,
they come to concerts.
I get you, and I don't try to go out and generally meddle in people's business to the point where, you know, I'm going to do a complete investigation before they buy a CD. However, we're in different times right now, you know, and yeah, if it costs us fans, it costs us fans. It's you know, I think we've always had that mindset, you know.
Woody Guthrie would have done the same thing?
Well, absolutely Guthrie would have done it.
Okay, now obviously you cook those desserts too.
I'd
Get
a Bible out.
Guy's never at a loss for words on the stage. It's interesting. What am I eating here?
That is our world famous churros in the
What am I dipping in? Do you have any idea?
Dolce Cabana sauce.
Oh,
Dolce something sauce. But yeah, these are my favorite.
Yeah.
Obviously.
It's unbelievable. Well, the food is great. I cannot wait to hear the CD. What I heard is fabulous. And congratulations on doing what you're doing. It's great to see you, Ken Casey.
Thank you so much.
I shake your hand with a little sugar.
Yeah, let's go.
Be well. Take care.
Thank you, Jim.
Great Ken Casey. The album again is This Machine Still Kills Fascists. That's it for tonight. Please come back tomorrow for Talking Politics. Soraya Wintersmith will talk to 2 local lawmakers helping to drive the White House push to end hunger in less than 10 years and the new tactics they're aiming to try. Plus, 9 months after Mayor Wu's big mass and cast clearing, residents are seeing encampments and drug use return. That and more tomorrow at 7. Thank you for watching. Stay safe And please don't forget Ukraine.